The sound never came while the room was quiet. It arrived only after the silence had already ended, like something waiting for the moment he stopped listening. And if you're someone who thinks silence is empty, you might want to stay with this story, because this one left something behind. In the autumn of 1900, in a narrow house tucked between two silent streets in Prague, lived a man named Edrin Halvek, a man who preferred quiet over conversation and stillness over movement. That preference became a problem, because silence stopped being empty. It began as something too small to matter. A faint sound, not loud, not sharp, just present, the kind of sound you forget the moment it ends. Edrin noticed it one evening while sitting alone at his desk. The room completely still, the air heavy with the kind of silence that makes even breathing feel noticeable. He had been writing, his pen moving slowly across the page, when he paused for a moment. Not intentionally, just a break. The silence held. Then he shifted slightly in his chair, and immediately after, he heard it, a soft click. Not from the desk, not from the chair, not from anywhere he could place. Just a sound. He didn't react, because it didn't feel important. But it stayed with him, not the sound itself, the timing. Because it hadn't come during silence, it had come after. The next time, he noticed it more clearly. The room was quiet again, completely still. He held his breath slightly, listening without meaning to. Nothing. Then he exhaled, shifted his hand, and there it was again, that same sound. A soft, distant tap. His eyes moved slowly across the room. Nothing had changed, nothing had moved. And yet the sound had. That was when the thought began, not fear, not yet, just curiosity. Because if a sound only existed after silence, then it didn't belong to the silence at all. It belonged to what came after it. Days passed, and the pattern didn't stop. It became clearer, stronger, more defined. Edrin began testing it, not aggressively, carefully. He would sit in complete silence, holding himself still, letting the room settle into that deep, heavy quiet he had always been comfortable in. And every time the same thing. Silence ended. Movement returned. And immediately after, the sound. Not always the same, sometimes a tap, sometimes a faint scrape, sometimes something softer, harder to define, but always after, never during. That was what made it different. Because sounds come from actions, from movement, from cause. But this one felt delayed, as if it belonged to something that had already happened, and was only just arriving. That thought didn't leave him. It grew, because the more he listened, the more he realized something worse. The sound wasn't random, it was consistent. Not in form, but in presence. Always there, waiting, until silence ended, and then appearing. That was when the fear began. Not because of the sound itself, but because of what it suggested. If something could exist only after silence, then what was happening during it? Edrin stopped enjoying quiet. For the first time in years, silence felt heavy. Not peaceful, not empty, but occupied. As if something existed inside it, waiting for permission to be heard. He tried to avoid it, kept small movements going, kept the room alive with sound. But eventually, everything becomes quiet, and when it did, he listened, not by choice, but because he couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, he decided to go further, not just listen, but test the limit. He sat in the center of the room, closed his eyes, and allowed complete silence. No movement, no breath, nothing. The silence stretched, longer than usual, deeper. He held it, as long as he could, until finally, he moved, just slightly, and instantly, the sound came. Louder this time, closer, not distant, not faint, but clear, a sharp Knock. His eyes opened immediately, scanning the room. Nothing, no source, no movement. But something had changed. Because this time, the sound didn't feel separate. It felt connected, as if it belonged to the silence itself. That was when the realization began to form, slowly, uncomfortably. The sound wasn't following the silence, it was leaving it. A residue, a trace, something that had been there but couldn't exist until silence ended. And that meant something far worse. Silence wasn't empty, it was holding something, and the sound was what escaped. After that, he couldn't ignore it. Every quiet moment felt longer, heavier, more dangerous. Because now he understood. The longer the silence lasted, the more something could build inside it, waiting until it had a chance to be heard. And then came the final moment, the one he couldn't explain. He sat again, in complete silence, longer than ever before. No movement, no breath, nothing. The room disappeared into stillness. Time stretched, minutes passed, or maybe more. He didn't know, because silence had no measure anymore. And then he moved, just slightly, and the sound came. But this time, it wasn't a tap, it wasn't a knock, it wasn't something distant, it was close, too close, right behind him. A breath, not his. And now I want to ask you something. If silence wasn't empty, if something stayed inside it, waiting to be released the moment it ended, would you try to stay quiet? Or would you be afraid of what might come out when you finally moved again? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if stories like this change the way you hear silence, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for the next story.